molecular additive manufacturing. So we've talked through different presentations, or even my own. We've kind of laid out some of the goals for molecular additive manufacturing. But the specific problem that we're targeting, so if you think of DNA nanostructures, it's a great way of making programmable materials and devices, but the resolution at which you can place things on nanostructures, there are some limits to that, and because the structures are very floppy. So trying to move into the atomically precise manufacturing domain with DNA nanostructures is potentially a really difficult problem. So the problem that we targeted is how can we take these self-assembled tools that we can design and assemble really well, and how can we arrange them in such a way that we can get them to targeting, get past the floppy limits of DNA nanostructures. And so then just the larger context around molecular additive manufacturing and why the specific tool that we'll get to in a minute is important is that it opens up this domain where we don't have to encode structural information in the molecules to make them do useful functions. So I mean, if you think of a protein, yes, or an enzyme, yes, there's a catalytic site there that does something really useful and exciting. But there's a lot of material just to form that catalytic site, just in the body of the protein itself to make that structure. And the same is true with DNA nanostructures. And so if we had an approach where you could start doing molecular additive manufacturing and just pulling building blocks out of solution, maybe we could make minimalist enzymes that don't have this big chunky body around them. If we could refine these systems far enough, maybe we could get to the point where we could start manufacturing a drug. So I will pass it.
Sure. So the question you're probably asking at this point is, so how are we going to break that size barrier between the kind of couple nanometer resolution that positioning something on a DNA structure gives you, and then the couple nanometers of fuzz you get from thermal fluctuations on the DNA nanostructure, to something that is able to position molecular moieties at such a scale that you could feasibly build these either catalytic centers or drugs. And so what we're interested in doing is creating a device that is itself self-assembled, but then it takes external stimuli and translates that into sub-nanometer motions, which are able to specifically position a right head somewhere on a surface such that you can now get specific positioning. Now, this is kind of an evolution of what Eric Benson showed yesterday in his talk. And so I would like to introduce you guys to a little structure called the pantograph. Is that the right word, Andrew? Yes. So this is a pantograph. And essentially what this does is it gives you a translation between two size scales of the same structure. So what you see here is at the end of the lever arm, you have a larger one than the smaller one. And so this has been used both to scale up writing of things as well as scaling down. And so the idea here is that you'd be able to position a larger template using a DNA breadboard and then write it to a smaller scale molecularly. And so I'll pass it on to Andrew.
Okay, so just to recap, I mean, this is a megalomaniac proposal. I once had dinner with a DARPA program manager who said, don't give me nanotechnology, I can't fund nanotechnology, it's been done. Give me picotechnology and I'll fund you. Okay, I thought it was a joke at the time, but this is actually what we're proposing. So this is how to scale down to the length scales of covalent chemistry from the rather crude and coarse length scales that we're used to working with DNA. Okay, so this is the idea. The controlling pattern on the right-hand side there, that's an origami. So that's a 100 nanometer square template covered in pixels. We can addressably position that end of our pantograph anywhere we like on that master image. And the slave writing position, slavishly, copies the pattern that we've defined. So we can position, and then we activate some chemical transformation at the position of the right head. Initially, to prove this principle, what we're going to do is simply put covalent modifications on a surface, something that you can read with high precision by AFM or STM, so you know what you've done. Okay, the long-term ambition, which, towards the end of the project, rather than just modifying a surface with point modifications, what we're going to do is push molecules around and actually join them to each other. So we use the right head to catalyze the formation of bonds between molecular building blocks to build up a molecule chunk by chunk. Not atom by atom, at least not yet, but molecule by molecule to make a larger molecule. So the difficult thing is making the pantograph, making the apparatus. It's not that impossible. Our idea is that you build the rods, the rods have to be rigid. The rods are gold nanorods, there might be carbon nanotubes, there might be semiconductor nanorods. These things are intrinsically rigid. We then have to make and position, the hinge at the bottom, the hinges within the pantograph, the right head, the attachment of a DNA strand on the end of this thing, which allows us to position it. So the difficult bit is putting the functionalizations on these rigid structural elements. And you use DNA as a template. So we build that structure loosely out of DNA. We functionalize that with binding sites that will strap the gold nanoparticles to the DNA. We know how to do that. We've done that. You cover your gold nanorod with little oligos attached by thiol chemistry to the gold. You put complementary short oligos on the DNA cradle, and you can put your nanorod wherever you like. So we can do that. So you position the white rods, if you like, on the top of this structure. You position the black rods on the bottom. You bind them to your DNA template. Within that, you've got a bifunctionalized short strand of DNA, for example, which has thiols on both ends, or dithiols on both ends, which binds to both rods and makes the hinge. And then, if you want, you can get rid of that sacrificial DNA nanostructure and leave yourself just with the functional elements that you need, the hinges, or you can leave it there because it's not doing any harm. Okay, so the project is to make that pantograph, to strap it to a surface. Stage one is you copy, you reduce by a factor of 5, let's say, to begin with, the origami-defined picture to a picture of surface spot modifications, which you then read by AFM or STM to find with what precision, with what noise level you can do this. The final stage of the project is you use your slave right head, as I say, to activate the formation of covalent bonds between molecular building blocks, and you build up a molecule, not just isolated patches of surface modification. And this revolutionizes covalent synthesis. You want to make a drug, this is the way you do it.
Any risks?
Risks? None.
You're going to be getting a happy face-shaped drug, so what can you ask for?
The difficult bit, the challenge is to make this structure, the gold nanorods, their properties, all you need from them is rigidity. That's fine, that comes for free. There's no risk there. The risk is, can we assemble this pantograph with hinges in the right place and without too much flexibility in the hinges, without it getting stuck to the surface, stuck to itself. It's a high-risk project, but it doesn't look to me impossible.
Okay, wow, many hands up. Okay, we're going to try to do a fast round here with you. Just pass it along after. You go first.
Oh yeah, I think this is brilliant. This is really interesting. Actually, the first thing I can think about the machine itself is basically a C2 glider. And then technically, because you can design protein that way. Of course, I cannot really speak for other materials nicely. But one issue for us to probe the C2 dynamic movement is we can only look at time points. So usually we use some chemical reactions to look at whether it's changing to one position or to another position. But actually, this idea is basically you can say if the frame can work in a continuous way with all the freedom there. So it's actually brilliant. So this is on the other hand can also tell whether your frame is having the C2 leg symmetry freedom of movement, and then can be generalizable. And yes, I think there are several ways of like just design the C2 gliders to try the things out. I don't really know the chemistry to do the drawing part, but I think probably other material can do that.
We thought of putting a photosensitizer, for example, on the right head, so that
Oh yeah, that's really brilliant. Anyway.
Okay, so this is less a question, and my challenge to Erik Drexler's group is to make their tool able to design multiple implementations of this and be able to compare them on different like specs. That's the challenge.
So this is a really cool idea, but you did talk about trying to make a minimalist enzyme. How on earth are you going to know which atoms to put together to get to that thing that has the right binding site and right reactivity?
I mean, come on. When we've got this technology working, you've got a new tool for making molecules that look the way you want to make them. You know, you don't have to slave for 5 years and 10 PhD students to make a different chiral stereospecific molecule. You just print it. Okay, you print it at very low yield, but you can make it. Then you can explore. I mean, we're giving you the technology to make this thing. You know, it's up to the users to discover the enzyme site that you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to provoke you because you're trying to do something that's really hard.
Yes.
But if you did it, the payoff is huge.
That's the idea. I agree. Yes, that's right.
All right. So one other comment on that is that nature already gives us like a rich examples of how functional groups are positioned on enzymes. And so I'm not sure whether the problem is more positioning them using proteins or whether the problem is designing them in the first place. We'd have to ask some more protein people about that. But anyway, continuing.
So, well, it's super exciting, so I have actually many questions, but I'll try to be super quick. I'm not sure carbon nanotubes would be hard enough. I don't know about nanorods, gold nanorods, but carbon nanotubes, they seem flexible to me.
Carbon nanotubes are very rigid. They will be plenty rigid.
They wouldn't shake? Okay. So my question also would be, what would you use to do the moving part on the large part? Like, would you use gliders, or would you actually test the first design using an STM microscope? Because this could actually be super useful.
That's the easy bit. So on the big end of this structure, you have a single oligo. That is moving on an origami tile, which is functionalized with a grid of oligos, each different. So you simply, this is operating in liquid, you flow in a bridging oligo, which links the moving end of the apparatus to one of those oligos on the origami tile. You simply rely on diffusion to let it find it. You don't have to move it actively. It will diffuse and wobble about all over the place. So you lock it in position. When you know it's locked in position, then you turn on your UV, for example, and do your photochemistry at the right head.
Okay, but there is a group in Toulouse in France, the CMS, doing pico technology, and I'm sure this could be done in vacuum by moving the big part with the STM. And this could be already super useful.
Yeah,
and last bit, if you want to try and simulate that in Samsung, I think it can be done. And exploring designs could be very exciting, actually.
So the big difference between doing things with molecules and doing them with an STM is an STM is 10 kilograms, and you've got one of them.
Yeah, sure.
Here we could be doing this
Yes,
with 10 to
parallel.
the 12 or 10 to the 15 in parallel.
Yeah, but it could be useful to test the concept, the rigidity of the rods and stuff.
There's no point in me saying this because Andrew's going to say I'm wrong. So there's lots of problems with this because again, trying to translate mechanical leverage down to the picoscale doesn't work because of all sorts of constraints, such as getting a pure nanotube that isn't going to bend, getting all this registry. If I had $1 for every time people said we're going to do this, Erik Drexler's dream would have happened already. However, let me say the good bit.
Gold nanorods don't bend, Lee.
Actually, you don't know what you're talking about. They do at that scale. But let me give you the positive bits. I really like it, right? So is there a way you could use some kind of interference pattern where somehow your shape that compresses can apply some kind of below the diffraction limit patterning And that will allow you to do it massively parallel over that. I need to write down how to do it, but I think, so mechanically not going to work especially, but if you could use it to project a pattern, you might be able to do something with it. That would be my way of saving it. But it's worth thinking about. Because AFM, STM, all these things, they're never going to do it, ever.
No.
DNA is too flexible. Nanotube could be stiff if you can get that one perfect tube.
My money's on gold nanorods.
Okay, we can talk. They don't work. Because gold diffusers. Yeah, let's stop taking acid and making stuff up, and then the field will go further.
All right, so mine is a little less controversial, but so I was curious to know about the scaling factor that you can get, you know, because what's the smallest thing you could print, you know, because you're reading something that's already like nanoscale, I guess. So.
I think the answer is we'd have to find out by experiment. I don't know. I mean, I'm fond of the idea of gold nanorods, but they don't have a large enough aspect ratio to scale down a long way.
Right.
Which is why you might think about using nanotubes. The trouble with those is they're out of control in terms of length. They're very difficult to functionalize.
But if you do the math, you can get like maybe like 2-3 scale factor.
I think we're talking about shooting for something of 2, 3, 5 initially. Okay. And I agree, to do something really useful, you probably need to go further, and that becomes a bit more of a challenge. But you've got to start somewhere.
Cool, thanks.